Welcome back to Wrong Sports, going back to my college basketball content, and this is going to be a first for the channel because I'm going to be covering college basketball, but in a different type of list. I am not going to cover certain types of teams, but instead I'm going to speculate on certain events and decisions that players, coaches, teams, colleges could have made in college basketball that could have changed the sport forever. I have thought of about 30 what-ifs in college basketball, and just a heads up, all of these will be from before 2000, and none of them have anything to do with what if this team would have won the national championship. So none of those. If you want a list for that, I'm going to be having a couple of lists coming up about the best teams to not have won a national title. Instead, though, this is going to be a what-ifs like, what if Marquette's legendary coach Al McGuire didn't take that VP job? Remember that? He got that and left Marquette after they won the national championship in 1977? Or what if Bill Hodges and Bob King had not talked Larry Bird into playing basketball at Indiana State in 1975? Larry Bird might not have even played basketball had that not happened. Those are just two examples of events and what ifs that you will hear about in my list of what-ifs in college basketball before 2000. But before I get into this, make sure, as always, you are subscribed to the channel below. Ring that bell so you get updates on brand new videos that I will be dropping. Please check out my Patreon. I have exclusive content there. Patreon.com/wrongsports. Link also in the description below. Plus, like and share this video, share this channel with other college sports fans. So I'm going to kind of go in chronological order. I'm at least going to be starting with the oldest what-if scenario. This is, what if James Naismith never went to Kansas in 1898? So we all know, or at least I hope that we all know, that James Naismith invented basketball in 1891, and by 1893 the new game was being played at all the YMCAs across the United States and also up into Canada as well. Naismith would leave Springfield, Massachusetts in 1895 to go out west to Denver to be the instructor of physical education at the YMCAs there from 1895 to 1898. While he was there in Denver, Naismith would also acquire a medical degree. After he got the degree, he was lured to the University of Kansas to be the chapel director as well as a physical education instructor. It wouldn't be until a few months into his time at Kansas that he would create the Kansas basketball program, and in the years to come would create the Kansas basketball legacy. But what if Naismith didn't leave Denver for Kansas? He could have gotten a job at another university, as the University of Denver was open at this point, and like most schools, they didn't have a basketball program or an athletic program, which Naismith could have easily created. I mean, the man created basketball. Also, Naismith was really good friends with another legendary coach in football, that being Amos Alonzo Stagg. Both of them had met at Springfield, and Stagg would even play in the first basketball game. Stagg left Springfield in 1893 to go to the University of Chicago, and I'm not sure if Chicago had a medical school at this point. They would eventually have one, but even if Chicago didn't, this could have been another place where Naismith could have gone instead of Kansas. So are you with me here on this list? Let's go to number 2. What if John Wooden had taken the Purdue offer in 1947 or the Minnesota offer in 1948? Both of these teams are famous stories that could have happened to the Wizard of Westwood. If you don't know about John Wooden, then you should stop this video and go look him up, because I won't give a huge background about him, but these two what-if stories happened to John Wooden before he would become the legend that he became at UCLA. Wooden was from Indiana and went to Purdue in the 1930s. Then he coached high school basketball until getting his first college head coaching job at the small Indiana State College. He would make a splash here as he would help the school almost win the NAIA title in 1948. Due to his success at Indiana State and being a Purdue graduate, he would get a call from his old school in mid-1948. The story is that he was offered the head coaching job at Purdue once the current coach's contract expired, which would have been within the next 2 years or so. But Wooden, who didn't really like the awkwardness of being an assistant coach to a coach that was basically a lame duck, declined the job. The story pales in comparison to the next what-if story, though. This has to do with Minnesota. A lot of people know this one. They were another school that were ready to hire Wooden in late 1948, with the second school being UCLA. Wooden's wife, who was also a Midwesterner, didn't really want to leave the Midwest for UCLA, a strange place that neither one of them really knew about. So due to that, she would push John to take the Minnesota job. The only thing was that Wooden waited and waited to hear the offer, and when he didn't hear back from them, he would accept the UCLA offer, and the rest would be history. So the story with why he wasn't contacted is pretty goofy and crazy. That was that Minnesota was dealing with weather and couldn't get around to contacting Wooden until later in the day. And by that time, John Wooden, who was an honest and sincere guy, really didn't want to back out on his commitment to UCLA and told Minnesota that he would decline. Either one of these what-ifs could have happened, but the non-phone call from Minnesota is one that routinely comes up whenever Minnesota basketball does well or doesn't do well. All right, here's one that I had not heard about until recently. That is, what if Red Auerbach took the Duke coaching job after Jerry Gerard in 1949-1950? So this is a crazy what-if story, but it was also very close to happening. Again, Red is a guy that I don't want to go into a full biography about because it would take about a half hour. But when this story came up, he was a pro basketball coach at this point with the Washington Capitals from 1946 to 1948. Red would leave the Capitals after the 1949 season and went down to Duke to be an assistant under the coach there, Jerry Gerard. Red's job at Duke would start July 1st, 1949, and his main duty was to work with the future Major League Baseball player, who was actually a guard on the Duke basketball team at this point, Dick Grote. The assumption that many were under was that Red would take over for when Gerard left, and many thought that it would be pretty soon because the coach was battling cancer. Auerbach would only stay with Duke for a few months before going back to the pros, and he would later write about this whole job situation and Duke that he felt pretty bad waiting for Gerald to die, and that it was no way for him to get his first head coaching job in college. Had Red stayed at Duke, it would have been really interesting to see how long he would have actually stayed in college because he was really a pro guy and he really wanted to rebuild the team. That's why this is a big what if, because he only stayed there for a very short time, but man, if he could have been the head coach at Duke, that would have been really cool to see. Number 4 is a story that I had covered early on this channel, that being what if the CCNY point shaving scandal was never exposed in 1950. This is one of the oldest scandals in all of college sports, and it nearly destroyed college basketball. I'm not going to go into the whole thing because, like I mentioned, I covered it on an early video that I did for the channel, and I'll put a link in the description below, also above. But after the scandal broke, the entire starting five for the CCNY team that won the NIT and the NCAA tournament in the same year were arrested, and some even served jail time, and most of them were blackballed from professional basketball as well. Along with this, it would bring great shame to the City College of New York, and in the next 4 years, they would de-emphasize all of their athletics until they became a Division III school. But what if this scandal never came to light? What would have happened to CCNY? Well, they probably would have taken over college basketball for about the next decade or so, as their longtime head coach Nat Holman, who knew New York City and predominantly recruited players out of New York City, like blocks away from the campus. Example being that the entire 1950 title team were from New York City schools, so all he had to do was just go out and reload and just keep going. The only reason why you never hear about CCNY now is because they drastically de-emphasized all of their sports due to this scandal, and some of the other New York City schools would also de-emphasize their sports as well, which would leave all of the great New York City players to get eaten up by some of the bigger New York schools, or even some New Jersey schools, Pennsylvania schools. Heck, everyone has gone into New York City and grabbed a player out of there. So I would even say that this scandal opened the door for schools not in New York City to start and grab the great New York City players that were going to a lot of these local schools. And here's another one of my favorite what-if stories. What if Bobby Knight was hired by Wisconsin in 1968? This is a crazy what-if that also involves another legendary coach in a different sport, but I'll get to that later. First, though, I'm going to go back to 1968. Bob Knight was at this point just finishing his third year at Army. He just coached them to 20 wins and an NIT appearance. The 20 wins was a huge deal, as it was known just how hard it was to win at Army, and due to his success and only being 28, Bob Knight was looked at as a great young coach to hire. After seeing all this, Wisconsin would zone in and make him their new coach in late April 1968. Knight even accepted the offer, but there was a little caveat, and it was that Knight wanted to tell West Point officials before Wisconsin would make it public. Well, someone blabbed and it was public, which put a young Bobby Knight in a tough spot, as Knight served in the Army and he didn't want to make the academy look bad. Plus, the academy had made Bobby Knight a head coach when he was only 25. With some time to think, Bobby Knight would then make another call to another future legendary coach in Bo Schembechler, who at this point was still coaching at Miami of Ohio, but had been through the coaching process by Wisconsin. And according to Bo, he felt like he was just there to be interviewed, as Wisconsin had already planned on hiring another coach. It was also worse when during Bo's interview, a Wisconsin official fell asleep. Since Knight had known Bo as both were assistants at Ohio State, Knight would tell Schembechler of how Wisconsin blabbed about the hiring, so Bo simply told Knight to just call Wisconsin and tell them he had no interest in the job. And that's exactly what he would do, as he would decline the job, stay at Army for another 2 more years before leaving for the Indiana job in 1971 and win a couple of national titles and rule over the Big Ten, while Wisconsin finished nowhere near them a bunch of times. So again, what if Wisconsin didn't blab about hiring Bobby Knight? They could have had Bobby Knight and won 3 national titles, or just put Wisconsin basketball on the map a little earlier. Okay, we are now past the halfway point, and we are going to what if Denny Crum would have left Louisville in 1975 or even 1977 to coach at UCLA. I'm sure if you are a college basketball fan, you know of the name Denny Crum. He's only a 2-time national title winning coach and put Louisville basketball on the map. But before that, he grew up in Southern California and went to a junior college in Los Angeles and finally managed to get on the UCLA basketball team in 1957. He would play for the next 2 years under John Wooden and then proceed to assist him for the next decade plus. As an assistant, Crum would turn into one of the best recruiters for Wooden, and that would draw the eye of Louisville, who would go on and hire him in 1971. Crum would take Louisville to the Final Four in his first season, and then again a few years later, both times losing to his former school and his former mentor, Wooden. After the 1975 loss, Wooden left UCLA, and that would start the big conversation of who would replace the legend. Crum was an obvious first choice, but he would decline. When the offer came out again in 1977, he declined again. He would say later that he declined both times because he loved his life in Louisville, and he said he was paid about 2 or 3 times more to coach at Louisville than what he would be paid if he were to coach at UCLA. Had UCLA hired Crum in 1975, he could have continued the UCLA streak of national titles, as UCLA went to the Final Four in 1976, and then they went there again 2 years later, both times under different coaches. But then again, if Crum would have taken the UCLA job, he probably only would have stayed there for a short period of time, like many of Wooden's successors did, as the next 3 coaches after Wooden only stayed for 2 seasons. All right, number 7 is a what-if story that I found just recently. I had to look more into this because it's kind of interesting, but it's what if Jerry Tarkanian left UNLV for the LA Lakers job that he apparently had on a silver platter offered to him. Jerry Tarkanian came to Vegas from Long Beach State in 1973 and would immediately bring UNLV to prominence with a Final Four appearance in 1977. That was a shocking result for some, but for Tark the Shark, it really wasn't, as he was averaging 20 wins a season, even at Long Beach State. And also, he had gone pretty far in the tournament with Long Beach State, so going far with UNLV wasn't a shock for him. The Final Four, though, made UNLV, as they were routinely selling out games, and even got the Thomas and Mack Center to be built soon after, to accommodate the 10,000 fans or more that wanted to show up to see Rebels games. With the success of UNLV, Jack Kent Cooke of the LA Lakers offered him the job of head coach of the Lakers. Tark, however, would reject that $70,000 offer from the Lakers because he was making about the same money at UNLV, and he liked it in Vegas. But then 2 years later, Cooke would contact Tark again, and Tark would ask for about 5 times the amount the Lakers offered the last time, because he was hesitant about taking the Lakers job. To Tark's surprise, Cooke said that he would pay him that, as well as offer other things like season tickets and cars for him and his wife and his daughter. But according to a Bleacher Report story, Tark's spokesperson at the time accepted the Lakers job while Jerry and his wife were vacationing. During the vacation, the same spokesperson, who the Lakers were exclusively talking to, went missing and was eventually found dead in the trunk of his car in a Vegas hotel parking lot. The strangeness of this murder only made Tark second guess himself. Then the news would come out that Jerry Tarkanian was going to the Lakers, and many in Vegas would reach out to Tarkanian and his family and ask him to stay. Not sure if it was the accumulation of the murder of his spokesperson and friend, along with the outpouring of love from the Vegas fans and the city of Vegas in general, Tarkanian would end up not taking the job, and he would stay at UNLV until 1992. He would win that national title, then coach for only 20 games in 1992 for the San Antonio Spurs of the NBA, and it would go horribly wrong. So maybe it was a good idea for him to stay in Vegas. And number 8 is a special one because there's a few what-if scenarios in here. First, what if Bill Foster got what he wanted from Duke and then not had left there for South Carolina? And then I'll go into the other what-if scenarios after that. First off, Bill Foster was a well-known coach. He had turned around teams at Rutgers and Utah before getting the Duke job in 1974. Duke were a mediocre team for the last 10 years or so, and had not been to the Final Four in almost 10 years. After 3 rebuilding seasons, Foster would turn Duke around and get them to within 5 points of winning the national title, but apparently behind the scenes during all that winning, Foster was looking for a more secure job and looking for an extension. That may have been one of the reasons that he would resign from Duke just 2 years after that Final Four run and go to the University of South Carolina. Foster has never said that was the reason, but contract negotiations were being talked about and nothing finalized ever came out, and South Carolina offered him a big money deal, so he took it. Whatever the reason, he would leave Duke, and that left the school and their athletic director, Tom Butters, to go out and sign a rather unknown but young coach from Army in Coach Mike Krzyzewski. But that hiring also came with a big what if, as Coach K was also a finalist for the Iowa State job that was also open at this point. But that job would ultimately go to a more well-known coach in Johnny Orr, who left Michigan after hearing about the salary offer that his assistant Bill Frieder was offered, and he would take the Iowa State job himself. So again, there's another what if to add to all this. What if Orr didn't leave Michigan for Iowa State? Coach K could have been coaching at Iowa State at this point, guys. Anyway, though, Coach K was hired, and he would have 3 middling seasons to start, and that started calls for his ousting. But after getting word of a great recruiting class for 1983-1984, Butters kept Coach K around, and it turned into being another great decision. So again, there's another what if. And for number 9, I am going to the high school ranks, kind of. What if the legendary high school coach Morgan Wooten coached in college? He apparently had offers to coach at numerous schools throughout the 1970s and 1980s. The biggest, though, offer he didn't have was from the school that he went to, that being Maryland, when they were looking to hire a coach in 1986. If you forget, Maryland basketball were in pretty rough shape after the 1986 season. That was due to the drug culture on the team and the horrible death of Len Bias. Maryland were looking to clean up the program, but they were also looking to make a big change. They were looking to college assistants as well as high school coaches for their next coach. Morgan Wooten had made sense since he had gone to University of Maryland, like I mentioned. He graduated from there, but he didn't play on the basketball team. He had instead, after school, gotten a job at DeMatha Catholic in Washington, D.C. in 1956. And over the next 3 decades, he would proceed to average 24 wins a season. He would win over a dozen local and state titles, along with producing dozens of college and professional players. But he wasn't the only high school coach they were looking at, as they were looking at another high school coach named Bob Wade. He was a former football player that had played in the NFL and AFL before getting a job at Dunbar High School in Baltimore in 1975 to coach basketball. He would only coach there for 10 seasons, but he would produce some great teams, as he won 341 games and only lost 25. And during all of his seasons, his teams were often ranked in the nation's top 10 best high school teams in the entire nation. In his best 2 seasons of 1981 through 1983, Wade put together teams that produced a 60-0 record, and he also coached Muggsy Bogues during that time too. And due to the great record and the producing of great players locally, Maryland would go with Bob Wade as their new head coach in 1986, and Maryland didn't even get into talking too much with Morgan Wooten for the job. Wade would ultimately flame out after 3 seasons at the school, but he was left with bare cupboards. But Wade would not head coach again, and Wooten would end up coaching until 2002, and he would win 1,274 games across 46 years, winning 5 high school national championships. Finally, I am ending the list with a player, that being what if Virginia or UCLA had recruited Michael Jordan. Well, this is one I kind of had to dig for, but it's about the best ever in Michael Jordan. What about if Michael Jordan didn't play for Dean Smith and instead went to Virginia, who did recruit him, or to UCLA, who Michael really wanted to play for but really didn't recruit too much? In case you didn't know, Michael Jordan was not heavily recruited in high school to start. He wanted to go to UCLA since he loved Kareem, but since UCLA were going through their 3rd head coaching change in 4 years, and were also looking to recruit a center instead of a shooting guard, they really didn't go too hard after him. And according to Michael Jordan in a Playboy article in 1992, UCLA basically told him they really didn't have any room for him unless he wanted to redshirt or sit out for a year, which would have been crazy to him. So next up was Virginia. Michael apparently had wanted to go to Virginia because they had 7'4" Ralph Sampson, and Jordan wanted to play with him in Sampson's final 2 years in college. Only thing was, they also did a piss-poor job recruiting him, as according to Jordan, during his visit to UVA, he felt slighted and felt like he wasn't really there to be recruited at all. Along with that, Virginia really didn't send any assistants to go watch Jordan in high school. And then the straw that broke the camel's back was, instead of a recruiting letter, Virginia sent Jordan an admissions form. Basically, this was telling Jordan to apply, and we will see what we can do to get him in. After all of that happened, Jordan would make his visit to North Carolina, accept their offer, which worked out because as a freshman, Jordan would hit the game-winning shot in the 1982 national title game and then go on to win more NBA titles and get his GOAT status. But if Jordan had gone to UVA, he might have helped to put UVA over the top to win that national title, since Virginia only went to the Final Four 1 time in the 4 years that Ralph Sampson played on the campus. Anyway, thank you so much for hanging out with me and checking out all of these big what-if scenarios. What if coaching hires? What if Michael Jordan had gone to Virginia or UCLA? So much more. Tell me what other what-if scenarios you have in the comments below. As always, thank you so much for checking this out. Make sure you give me a like. Make sure you share this video. Please subscribe to the channel and check out my Patreon. Link in the description below.